the equipment industry, their big concern is who's going to pay for it and how we're going to make money out of this, which are two reasonably good concerns, really, especially when you think of that chart I showed earlier, where they get jerked around by their customer, switching you on and off and everything else with no commitment and everything else. So you can understand their concern. Why should I invest in this when I've got no guarantee you're going to buy it from me? You expect me to pay the whole tab and you're not going to do anything like this? I mean, be reasonable. Would you do that? This is where the common sense bit comes in. You're asking your customers to do something that you would not do yourself. Now, I think that's pretty unreasonable. And, but, you know, that's the way it works, because this is called capitalism. But being capitalism doesn't make it right, by the way. You know, the Ford Motor Company were capitalists when they decided to kill people in the Ford Pinto, because it was cheaper to kill them than it was to fix the problem. That is capitalism too. But it's not very nice capitalism. But that was a decision made by Ford. That it was cheaper to kill than it was to fix. The European companies, the big three companies, are basically saying nein in Infineon, nay in NXP, and no and non in ST Microelectronics. They're pretty clear about it. S450mm is not for us. We don't need it, thank you very much. So we've got these divides in here, lots of camps in here, lots of positions here. We don't know how that European position is going to now change with this initiative here, whether that will change the landscape, that remains to be seen. But currently there are these different positions here. There is no general consensus, just a general underlining feeling that when you think about the presentation this morning, the cost factor there, that cost of the wafer production going up, will the 450mm drag that back down again? You know, we hope so, but again, it's not clear. It is pretty clear, though, that if 450mm happens, it will be game-changing. It will definitely bifurcate the industry even more than it has been already, and it will affect everybody in that food chain there. I mean, that is pretty clear. And in fact, some of the motivation for moving to 450mm is quite simply to kill the competition. If I got a lower cost structure than you have, I will win the business. I mean, it really is that simplistic. So that is one of the motivating factors. And that will ripple right the way down. Every single fab, the 300mm fabs, the 200mm fabs, they will all be affected by that transition. There'll be a migration down, there'll be a cannibalization down, there'll be transitions down. My market will be your market tomorrow, so I've got to find a new market, so I take my next guy's market. The whole thing is going to be shifting down the food chain. And the long-term impact is really going to be, I think, that it will have this huge bifurcation effect on the industry. Those that have and those that don't have. And those that have will be at the leading edge, because all of the leading edge processes there on out will be 450mm based. So you will simply find that in 10 years' time, whatever the technology happens to be, that will be on a 450mm platform. And so the sort of gaps that you're seeing now on 200mm versus 300mm, on immersion lithography versus non-immersion lithography, those type of gaps that we're seeing in the production capability will be amplified even more by those that have a 450mm structure with the technology that goes with that and those that don't. So you'll see these dislocation points in the food chain. The digital agenda. I think Europe, and the world actually, I think it's going to have more ramifications than just simply in Europe. I think this is going to have huge global ramifications. We have a lot a debt to pay to her. When she announced this initiative, I was there, and she said, this is her words, "I'm not a politician, I'm Dutch, I tell it bluntly." Okay, she just lays it on the line. Okay, and I have to be corrected on this because Keys told me she's not only Dutch, she's from Rotterdam. Evidently, that is more strict than it is just being Dutch. Okay, she lays it on the line.
She's a truck driver as well.
There you go. See, I mean, and she's laid it on the line. You know? Europe will have this 20% share. We will be this, we will be that. It's pretty clear. I mean, this to me is the Kennedy statement. We shall put a man on the moon by the end of this decade and bring it back home again safely. It's very clear what the objective is. Now, we didn't know how to put a man on the moon back in 1963 either, and we don't know how to get to 20% market share yet either. But that's what our elite European leaders group is challenged to do, is to come up with the answers to that. How do we do it? And report back to Neely. And I wouldn't like to be the guy that goes to Neely and says, "Sorry, Mrs. Cruz, we're not going to do it. We can't do it. We're going to fail." I don't think I'd like to be in the room when you tell her that one. So I think the message is pretty loud and clear. You're going to have to find the answer to that, because she won't take any crap from you guys. Not from you, she'll convert it. The Commission's bold and holistic view, and this is taken straight from her speech. So those of you that are unclear what she means, read her words. I want to double our chip production, not systems production, not any other weaselly words that try to ram a few things in there. I will double our chip production to around 20% of the global production. I want Europe to produce more chips in Europe than the United States does. So if you think you can weasel out of one goal there, you can't. There's another goal in there that says it's got to be this and that there. So the message is very, very clear. It's a partnership. It's the Airbus of chips analogy, I think, is just meant to be a message of the significance of it. It's going to be collaborative. It can only be done via that way there. And it is a tremendous issue there. And of course, it's going to embrace those three legs of the stool. It's not simply 450mm. It's not simply more. It's not simply more than more. All of those things are interrelated. They're all interdependent, and it does embrace all aspects of that. The European position currently is actually not that bad when you look at it. The real missing link is the IDMs, and that's where the weakness is. But that could be changed around, and hopefully that will be changed around with the outcome of the European Leaders Group, which has to report back in December, so they haven't got much time to come up with the answers. Just to close up with some other stuff, which is just other bits and pieces that I wanted to throw out on the table. And the first one is, this industry has always been dishonest. I mean, read the data sheet, there's always lies. Read the marketing blur, there's always lies. Okay, we are good at marketing bullshit. Okay, that's how we grew this industry. You know, the classic Fairchild data book of the 1960s was crammed full of integrated circuits that you actually couldn't buy. They just threw the data sheets out there to see if someone might want to buy it, in which case they go away and make it. So this is the way it was. Now we're having the same level of dishonesty on the node. We all talk about 14 nanometers and 16 nanometers and 20 nanometers. You know, this is a complete and utter nonsense right now. Absolute complete nonsense. It is a distortion. It is deceitful. I mean, this has gone beyond marketing hype. I mean, this is just absolutely ridiculous. And it's partly because what we used to measure is no longer valid. So we believe that the industry needs to readdress this situation and start to be honest again and come back with a more consistent view of how to interpret what a node is when you can't measure it anymore, particularly when you've now got a vertical transistor rather than a planar transistor. And we've come up with some ideas in our own way. Mike will talk more about this. He's the expert. I'm just the gopher. But he's the one that knows all this stuff. But we think things like maybe measuring the SRAM is a better way of looking at it. And again, this is our opinion, looking at the data that we've studied, some of the information we've had, again, under some of the consulting projects that we've been working on. But in terms of where we think it really is that if we were looking at a real apples-for-apples comparison at the so-called 14 nanometer node, we would probably put Intel at between 16 and 17 nanometers. We put Samsung at probably 18, just slightly behind, and we put TSMC and Global Foundries at 20 nanometers, and we will put ST Micro at 21 nanometers. So that's what we believe it should be on, like a kind of an apples and apples comparison. But, you know, that's just our opinion, it's irrelevant. What is really relevant here is that the industry needs to come up with a matrix, the ITRS roadmap, whatever it is, someone's got to come up with now a proper way of measuring where are we on this Moore's Law transition curve, because it's out of control right now. And of course, when it's out of control, the marketeers have fun. You know, I used to call it wrong a microprocessor because microprocessors were fashionable, so I sold it because I said it's a programmable microprocessor. You know, that was called a wrong by any other stretch of imagination, but we sold lots of them to Maytag. The supply chain. This is my favourite slide. You know, do I look like a cow? Okay. Now, those of you who maybe aren't quite so familiar with the fact that there was a bit of a hoo-ha earlier this year because horses ended up in hamburgers. And hamburgers are supposed to be made out of beef, not horses. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a horse burger, providing you told people it's a horse burger. But it wasn't. It was a mixture of horses and beef. Now, why is that important? It happened because the supply chain got out of control. The supply chain was so elongated that the whole industry lost control of it. And it started off with, you know, the horses being killed in Romania, shipped via 2 intermediaries to a French food processing factory, which sent it to a factory in Luxembourg, and that sent it to another French firm, and somewhere on the route, somewhere slipped in a couple of horses. Now, why did they slip in a couple of horses? Because horses are cheaper than cows. So they're under cost pressure to reduce the cost. So, hey, a couple of horses, no one will notice. I'll just put them in, it's all meat, what the hell, and I'll mix it all up. But unfortunately, DNA testing tells you these days, they knew exactly where this stuff came from. So again, you have to think about this. Stretched out supply chains are dangerous. You lose control. And we saw that when we had the earthquake in Japan. We saw how people had supply chain dependencies they never even realized about because it had got so long and it got outsourcing, and the outsourcers outsourcing. You have no idea where it is, so it'll take care of your supply chain, otherwise you might find a horse in your wafers. This is another interesting thing. It's all about capacity. This chappie here started a low-cost airline in Norway. Now, you would think that's a pretty stupid place to start a low-cost airline in a high-cost country. But what did he do? He bought 222 aeroplanes. 222 airplanes. He split the order 50-50 between Boeing and Airbus. That got him a good price because he could trade one off against the other. Okay? He's now taken 220 aeroplanes out of the supply chain. If I now want to buy an aeroplane, I have number 223 in the list. Because that industry works quite well. It actually has customers first. You get the first choice, okay? I mean, it actually works well. So, again, the message here is if capacity is tight, or it's limited, or it's fixed, if you get your order in first, you're going to get the parts. And the next guy's going to get the parts after you. So again, we tend to behave like the same way as we buy our capital equipment here. The semiconductor chip companies also don't place their orders until they actually need it. And you know, that might be dangerous there. You might suddenly find yourself at the back of the queue, and then they might not be able to get the deliveries when you want it. Once the capacity is sold, it is sold. And the third supply chain security, another issue here, is the Swatch group. Now what is really interesting is I took these 3 examples from The Economist magazine in the same article. There were just 3 completely unrelated issues there, but their similarity and their relevance to the chip industry was quite profound. Swatches. We tend to think of Swatch as being the nice little plastic things that are very fashionable and very fun. And of course that's how Swatch itself got reborn. It was killed by Casio in the 1970s when we had those horribly grotty LCD watches which sold, were very accurate, but they were grim, nasty pieces of work, but they were very low cost, and of course it killed the classic spring and watch industry. Swatch refused to die, and they reinvented themselves, and they had the Swatch which reinvented themselves. Great. They then proceeded to buy up the rest of the world. And right now you're in a position whereby 70% of the world's high-quality advanced watch movements are now made by Swatch. And 90% of the world's balance springs, the precision balance springs, 90% is made by Swatch. That is a huge market position. Now they've taken the view that actually we'd rather make them ourselves. And so they took the decision to say, we're going to cut back our share to 30%. We're only going to outsource 30% and the other 40% in-house. And that caused huge repercussions throughout the Swiss watch industry. Because now these people say, where am I going to get my balance sheet from? That's your problem. You shouldn't have stopped making them. You know, you decided not to make them because it's cheaper to buy them from me. Okay, well, now sorry mate, I'm not going to give it to you anymore. So again, you know, what's good today might not be good in the future. You have to kind of think ahead in terms of things like that. Now, of course, they haven't been allowed to do that because their dominant position in the marketplace has caused political repercussions at the World Trade Organization level there. But again, it just shows some of the risks in the supply chain if you don't take a longer-term view on some of these issues. So just to summarize then, the whole theory of this conference here was business as usual, or is it going to be different this time around? And our feeling is, when you look at some of the issues that we're dealing with, lots of issues here, the sub-20 nanometer, the 450 millimeter, the cost structure, the the of fabs, the readjustment there, all of these issues here, all had to be addressed, and a lot of other dislocation points that we've looked at, whether this 450mm initiative will actually come to fruition, will it change the way the world works, how Europe is already a dominant feature in the technology of 450mm with the work in IMEC and the work in ASML, so the world is dependent upon Europe for the 450mm transition. So again, lots of issues there. And our feeling is that actually it needs to be different this time around. There needs to be a change in the way we think about it, and to a certain extent, a lot of the discussions we had today all alluded to, directly or indirectly, to a re-verticalization of the industry, whether it's directly or indirectly, virtual or real. And I think this movement back to a more cooperative vertical structure is inevitable. We've all learned how to cooperate horizontally. I think now we have to learn how to really properly coordinate and cooperate vertically. And that means that situations like treating our capital equipment people in the way we treated them, by jerking them around with these 200% year-on-year growth rate changes, and the way you look at that book-to-bill ratio, that changes dramatically on a month-by-month basis. You can't run a business where you've got to invest on a 4 or 5 year lead time being run like that. The disaggregation trend, Yong Song showed this chart last year. I borrowed it, Yong, thank you very much. I think it's a great chart. It showed the disaggregation trend. My feeling is that it's gone, it's through, it's there, and now maybe we have to start to think about reaggregating again in a sensible way, in a strategic way, because we've certainly seen the benefits of that. And just because we didn't make it work in the past doesn't mean to say vertical integration is wrong. It just says we didn't do it very well. Okay, so don't pick that. There's nothing wrong with it in theory. Apple and Samsung are good examples of showing actually if you do it right, it's pretty good. The questions we've been talking about here, again, this was the basis of our thinking about the meeting, the conference, the forum this time around. We asked our speakers to think about some of these things here, and their presentations are geared around that. Those are very key questions. And the key thing to remember, though, is that basically it's not the model that matters and things like that. It's competitiveness. It's how we execute. And it's people that make companies great, not the model that they had or anything like that. It's people that work and make the companies great. And when you see companies like Plessey reviving around, doing the good things they're doing, IQE doing the great things that they're doing, we wish them success, that they can be the next Qualcomm, they can be these huge market leaders, because we do need to have these here, and it would be nice if they actually were more broadly spread. In terms of this collaborative approach, Europe has been a pioneer of collaboration. It's been very successful at collaborating. When you look around the world, you don't see the same collaborative success. Partly it was driven out of need, because of the smaller size, the broad spread of the companies, the need to cooperate was there. It forced the issue. It did not happen naturally. When you go back to the Jesse days, when you go back to those earlier Spree days, collaboration wasn't natural. It was resisted, it didn't happen naturally, but now it is. Now it's a way of life. Now it's normal. People don't even think about doing them by themselves. They think collaboratively. And now I think we have to think about collaborative in a vertical way rather than a straightforward horizontal way. And that's part of, I think, also the message behind the Commission's initiative there. That is a vertical collaborative model as well as a horizontal collaborative model. Now, the more things change, the more they stay the same, not. This is one of my nice charts. I love looking at this. This looks at the key products, the key technologies, and the key companies 20 years ago. And look how it's changed. The technologies that we had to be in 1985 was bipolar, except memories. Bipolar PALs, DRAMs, NMOS, standard logic, ASICs, gate arrays, okay? This was the key products. This is what made companies great. The products that we were building into the areas where we sold these to, cash registers, point-of-sale terminals, computers, PABXs, these type of products here. And the companies that were building these products, these were your top 10 customers. These are the customers you killed for. Names like Andon, Bull, Burrow, CDC, Data General, DEC, Grundig, GTE, HP, NCR, Memorex, ITT. how many of these companies even exist today? Very, very few. There's one on that list there that still exists, that's Hewlett-Packard, and it's a completely different company to what it was back then. So your killer customers of yesterday are obsolete, they're dead, they're gone, they're buried, they don't exist. That means your top customers today also won't exist in 10 years' time. So you've got to remember that divorce is the inevitable part of getting married. At least in the chip industry it is. And the divorce cycle is 10 years. So you better plan for divorce the day you get married. Doesn't sound very nice, but that's the way it is. Otherwise, because if you don't, you'll be stuck with a bunch of dead customers. And that won't do you any good at all. This is my chart for the chip industry leaders. Leadership in some ways is a bit of vanity, but it does give you a measure of success there. I can redraw this chart in 2015, not too long to wait, but you can already see how it's shaping out, how the dynamics have already changed in just 8 out of those 10 years. And you can see the direction that it's going to be in over the next couple of years by the time that shapes out. And when you look at it on a 10-year window there, you see dramatic changes. And it's because of the product changes, because of the technology changes, because of the customer changes. And all of these things here, you really have to look at this kind of dynamic to figure out you have to creatively destroy your own company to make sure that you're going to be around with the right products at the right time for that next 10-year decade to be able to survive that. And very few companies have actually managed to survive in that way.